Welcome to Formed, where each week we navigate a relevant topic or question through honest conversations. We are three pastors with three different backgrounds on staff together at Irving Bible Church in Irving, Texas. We believe we are constantly being formed in the way of Jesus for the sake of the world, and we hope this podcast helps with that. So let's jump into this week's episode of Formed. Welcome back to another week of Formed. We're back hanging out, talking about some fun things. Today we're going to talk about the Enneagram, all the hot takes about Enneagram and the fun world of the Enneagram world. But if you're watching on YouTube, try to leave us a comment. Tell us what you think, good or bad, on YouTube. And if you are listening audio platform, you could leave us a review on iTunes. That would help us out, help us kind of get the show out there. And yeah, March Madness. Whose bracket is busted? I know Barry's is.
My bracket begins busted because
He's just not in it.
I know nothing. I know nothing about
Barry,
what's
do you
happening
know?
right now.
So here at IBC, we did a bracket challenge, and we're obviously past the first weekend, first two rounds. Do you know who's in first and second of our bracket challenge?
Now,
Take a
remind me
guess.
which sport we're talking about here. Yeah.
Well, it's not swimming or.
I really have not followed this whatsoever. I know that I have friends who are like all distraught, but I don't even know what schools they are that lost. So
We had a good amount of
Sissy,
people.
on the other hand,
Yeah.
is actually, from what I understand,
Quite the
yeah,
March Madness queen, I'd like to call myself.
in the lead, right? March Madness queen.
Last year, I remember you did really well.
I did.
Right now, Sissy is one, and
Number
I'm
one,
second.
baby.
I'm second right now.
Well, I told him yesterday that it's half intuition, half analytics, and he kind of laughed at that. So felt like he didn't believe me, but I've got first place right now going into Sweet 16.
So what she really did, she's like, all right, which team,
what colors do I like?
mascots, or trying to give an Enneagram number to a team?
There we
That's
go.
right.
There
That's
we go.
right.
Their style of play. But speaking of Enneagram, let's talk about the Enneagram. I put a note in here. I was like, besides the QR code, I don't know what has gained more steam over the past, 5? I mean, I was trying to think of the first time I heard about the Enneagram, and I know I didn't know anything about it in high school or even like college. It's been since I've been in Dallas that I feel like it's really gotten. Am I wrong to say it's gotten more popular over the
No, it
past?
definitely has. I mean, I have been aware of the Enneagram for quite some time because of my work in spiritual formation, and it particularly became prominent in Catholic circles back in the late 70s and on into the 80s, but really in more Protestant evangelical circles, I would say over the course of the last 5-6 years, something like that, it's really kind of taken off. And so I had an awareness of it for quite some time, worked with a guy who knew it well and was just blown away by the insights that he was able to apply from it, but was always a little bit, I think, leery of using it, mainly because it wasn't well known, and even sort of the drawing that often goes along with it.
Yeah.
I think people kind of look at and go, that's creepy. What is happening here? I mean, I've heard people that have tried to compare it to the signs of the zodiac or something like that, which is ridiculous when you actually understand where the sort of system comes from. We'll talk a little bit about that, like how it's developed. There's nothing mystical or magical about it. It is a basic set of observations about human motivation and behavior, and as we'll talk about in a minute, plus math, 3 groups of 3. And so, it's a tool that I just love. All these kind of tools that are about self-knowledge, self-awareness, personality, and temperament. I sort of geek out on all of them, but this is one that I
geek
found
out
to
on
be.
something?
I do. It's true. It's true. I do. Yes, I don't watch March Madness. I spend my time geeking
He's
out over.
geeking out about
Yeah,
the Enneagram.
yeah.
He's like, I'm reading
So,
my Bible. It's like Jesus jukes us all.
Yeah, I had a similar experience, I think, when I first heard about the Enneagram, which probably was only, 6-7 years ago. Not heard about it, but started reading more about it, thinking more about it, where it felt like, that feels a little, I'm not sure I want to get into that. It also felt like you're telling me who I am. Like, it felt very typecasting, stereotyping, and so nobody tells me who I am. And so I didn't really want to find out too much about it. And so that was kind of my first very superficial take of the Enneagram.
Yeah, because now there's books on it.
Yeah.
There's conferences on it. There's like jobs on it, experts, podcast, and it just feels like it's so, the past church I worked at, we had a person come in, that was like their job was to do these workshops. And I remember on this lady on staff that she starts like weeping because it was like her finally like figuring out, putting like an explanation of like who she, is. Yeah. And I was like, what is going on? What is this? But anyway, yeah. So just brief overview real quick of if you want to touch on the origins or like where it came from, and then what's if there is somebody listening to saying, I don't even know what the Enneagram is. What is it?
Yeah. So let me start with the sort of unpacking of that statement. It's a basic set of observations about human motivation, behavior, plus math. So it begins with the recognition that is really is connected back to kind of biblical Christian anthropology about, the Bible talks about our heart, our mind, and our strength. And the Enneagram is based on this idea that all of us make our way in the world with our hearts, right? Our feelings, our minds, we think our way through the world, and our bodies are doing that sort of gut intuition, what needs to be done. And so you have these kind of three centers of awareness, intelligence, ways of making our way in the world. And we all come to sort of over-rely on one of those, and then we have another one that's sort of underdeveloped. It's like the bodybuilder that works out but only does arms and so has these little skinny legs. Like all of us have this one area that we over-rely on, thinking, feeling, or doing, and then we have an area that is sort of underdeveloped. And that gives you then, when you kind of understand the three groups and then the three that are repressed, it gives you three groups of three, thus 9 types. And so it's this basic set of observations about human motivation and behavior plus math. What's dominant, what's repressed, giving you 3 groups of 3, thus 9 personality types.
Sissy, you know your Enneagram number?
I do. I'm an 8, the challenger.
Okay, where does the 8 fall in? What triad does the 8 fall into?
Yeah, so the gut body triad. Do you want to talk about that, Barry?
Well, yeah. So again, 3 groups of 3.
Yeah.
So it can kind of be broken down. 8s, 9s, and 1s are called the body triad, the gut triad. Make their way in the world first with doing. What needs doing? What's mine to do? And so that kind of gut-centered triad. So we can think about those 3 numbers: 8, 9, 1. 8 is the challenger, Sissy, the challenger. And the challenger kind of has this basic desire to protect themselves, to assert themselves. They have a fear of being controlled or sort of not having the ability to determine their own course. And so the 8s tend to be the most assertive, sometimes aggressive. Some of us that aren't 8s sort of sometimes assume that assertiveness is actually aggression when it's not. But 8s are the challenger, that very assertive kind of personality type. 9s are the peacemakers, and that's my number. I'm a 9 with an 8 wing, and we can maybe talk about wings a little further on. But the 9 is the peacemaker. The 9 wants to maintain the sense of inner peace, stability, harmony in the world. So there's a tendency to fear or avoid conflict, and so yeah, the 9 sometimes is referred to as the darling of the Enneagram. They're really easy to get along with, but part of that is sometimes an unwillingness to actually assert themselves, because 9s sort of have this what needs doing dominant, and yet also then doing repressed. It's not mine to do, that's somebody else's to do. So 8s, the challenger, 9, the peacemaker, and then 1's the reformer. 1 has this basic desire to be good, to be right, to set things right. So they're very attuned to sort of what's wrong with the world and what's wrong with themselves, and they want to fix it. So the 1 can tend towards kind of perfectionism, and they have very high standards for themselves, high standards for other people. And so they have then this harsh inner critic for if they don't meet their own expectations for themselves, there's this harsh inner critic that they experience. If they do meet their own expectations, they feel like they didn't set the expectations high enough. And so they kind of raise those expectations. So their basic fear is they fear being wrong or getting it wrong, being imperfect. And so 8s, 9s, and 1s, the gut or the body triad.
I think the underlying emotion under all three of them is anger, right? Where so for the 8s, it's very outwardly focused. For the 9s, they repress that because they shouldn't feel angry. And for the 1s, it's internally focused. They're their worst critic type of thing. And I mean, even I said just a few minutes earlier, so as an 8, I said, yeah, I felt like the Enneagram was telling me this is who you are. Nobody tells me who I am. That's such an 8 thing to say, right? It's that sense of you can't control me. You can't tell me what to do. And so there's for all of these types, I think there's a healthy and an unhealthy side. So in my healthiest moments, I can be very self-confident as an 8. I can be very assertive. Because I typically 8s have a moment where they experienced or witnessed some sense of powerlessness as a child, and so that leads them to feel like they can very easily see those that are weak and vulnerable and run to really protect them. They're really good leaders because they're able to see the potential in others and draw that out of them. But then in their unhealthiest selves, they're domineering. Oftentimes words that are used of 8s are, and I have been in these moments where you're a steamroller, you're a bulldozer. So you're just plowing through people to get your way. And that's a really good word picture of what can happen in your unhealthiest moments. But of course, there's unhealthy and healthy sides for all of these types.
And part of the power of the tool is just the more you understand yourself, right? It's ultimately a tool for transformation.
Yes.
So, it's recognizing there are certain those natural strengths, the positive, healthy side of my personality, and then there are those traits that are the unhealthy side.
Yeah.
And part of the point is transformation, self-awareness leading to transformation. So I'm a 9, a peacemaker, and there's all kind of really positive, healthy side of that ability to help bring calm, bring peace, have compassion. But then the negative side is a tendency towards passivity. This is a tool that is really, the way I talk about it often, is unmasking the flesh, right? That broken sort of self-oriented side of all of us. And so understanding that my besetting sin as a 9 is sloth, which is not necessarily laziness. It's not caring in the way that I ought when something is wrong, doing something about it. And so the tool helps me to recognize that part of my growth, part of my transformation is drawing on courage, drawing on assertiveness, not just saying, well, I'm a 9. That's not who I am. That's not what I do. But actually, no, going against what is that sort of natural tendency of my personality.
Sissy, when did that unmasking happen with you? Like, how did you find out you were an 8, and how did that like kind of change how you, I don't know, I don't want to say thought of yourself, but like.
Yeah. No, I think the Enneagram has really been transformational for me. And so when I first started reading and thinking about it, and we were actually using it a lot here, I immediately resonated with being an 8. Like there was no question in my mind that I was an 8. Because what I love about the Enneagram is it's not just, and what I think differs from maybe other tools, it's not just about what you do. So it's not just about behavior, it's about why you do it. And that I think is the beauty of it's about your motivations, how you see the world, how you relate to others based on these core motivations. And for each one of us, that's different. And so I really resonated with the 8. But when I first started learning about the 8, I didn't want to be an 8 because even the title alone is the challenger. And so I began immediately seeing and reading about the ways my behavior or my natural habits and tendencies can lead to hurting other people or keep me away from really resting in the love of God. And so my first inclination was like, I don't really want to be this person. I'd rather be the peacemaker or the achiever, or, there's all these other types that I'd rather be. I don't really want to be the 8. But then as I started learning more about it, I started seeing the beauty and the value of the gifts of when I'm at my healthiest self, when I'm being my true self, resting in the love of God, in my identity as the beloved daughter of God, there are these really wonderful things about being an 8. And it also gave me at the same time, so there's the healthiest view of myself, my true self, when I'm living in the freedom of all that God has made me to be. But then there's what's often called the false self. So that unhealthy version of you where you're striving out of your own flesh. When I'm trying to do things, proving my own worth and exploiting the gifts that God has given me, which often leads to me trying to control people, situations, and circumstances. And so it's been transformational for me to see what are those propensities and tendencies I have when I'm afraid, when I'm in stress, that I go to. And so now I'm better able to be aware of when does that happen, and now what do I do to become, to lean more into the person that has always intended me to be. So one really good example for me, and this is where the Enneagram really was transformational, was for the 8, you immediately start from a place of, I can't trust people. So you're trying to protect yourself. You want to protect kind of your inner circle. So I can't trust people. So the kind of posture I took for most of my life is, if I met somebody, you cannot be trusted until you prove that you're trustworthy. And often I think I would even test people to see if they were worthy of my trust, which does not lead to a good relationship in any kind of sphere of your life. Yeah, like, hey, let me see if you're really trustworthy. And what the Enneagram helped me see was you can't do life like that. You're never going to have healthy relationships or this connection that all of us are really longing for. So what if I begin from a posture of, I'm going to trust you until you've done something that proves you're untrustworthy. And that while it's really subtle, was really profound in how I did relationships. That I think I was so afraid of being hurt, of being betrayed, of being rejected, of being manipulated, that I'm just going to hold you here. And now what the Enneagram and a lot of, it's been a tool that has led to great transformation for me, because I'm able to say, God can be trusted, and God wants me to trust other people. That our deepest pain is often found in relationships, but our deepest healing is found in relationships. That's been huge for me, and just it's affected all different ways of how I think and how I operate in relationships at work, and in my personal relationships, in my relationship with God. It's led to a greater vulnerability with both God and with others, whereas before I would say vulnerability is weakness. Like, do not be vulnerable because you're going to get hurt, where now I see it as a strength. And it's actually really courageous to be vulnerable. So it's been really good for me to have this tool.
Is the Enneagram biblical?
So we hadn't finished going over all the numbers. We only covered 3, so we need to go back and do that. But is it biblical? No, I mean, it's not something that emerges directly out of the Bible. Certainly not. I think the question is it somehow fundamentally incompatible with the Bible?
Yeah.
And I would say, no, it's not. I mean, there's this really ancient kind of Christian principles. All truth is God's truth. So if it's true, it ultimately has its source in God. Now, this tool does not ultimately have its source necessarily in the Bible as though it emerges straight out of the pages of the Bible. I think it is consistent with what you find in the Bible. I think even thinking about that idea of, love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, that in some ways this wisdom of this tool is based on that kind of understanding of humanity, the kind of biblical anthropology. And then there is wisdom from the Christian tradition, going all the way back to an ancient monk, Evagrius Pontus, who talked about these 8 ruling passions, later kind of came to be known as the 7 deadly sins. But that actually underlies this tool. Each of the 9 personality types has a propensity towards one of those ruling passions or one of those deadly sins, which again is part of how this tool helps to do that kind of unmasking the flesh. It is helping see that different personalities have a propensity to a particular kind of sin. And then when you have that recognition, then it is, okay, so how does this tool then help me be transformed, become more Christ-like in the way that I live? So no, it's not biblical in the sense of it emerges straight out of the Bible. Right. But it is consistent with the teaching of the Bible, and actually I think helps us pursue our biblical calling to be formed in the way of Jesus for the sake of the world. What this whole podcast is really all about. I think it's a tool that helps us to that end.
Yeah, so I think I would say it's a tool. It's a very insightful tool for personal growth. The tool itself doesn't cause transformation, but I think God uses it just like he uses so many other practices and disciplines in our lives to lead to real transformation. So it causes us to do some internal work and open ourselves up to the work that God wants to do in us.
And it's a tool, right?
Yeah,
it's not
a tool.
the
It's not the only tool.
It's a tool.
Right.
And if you find it helpful, meaningful, which I think you have, then use it. If you find it not helpful, not useful, sort of suspicious, it's not essential.
Yeah.
It's a tool, but I think it's a tool that can be profoundly helpful, both for self-awareness and then for understanding and relating to each other, which is part of the way that we've used it with our staff here.
Yeah.
After baptism here, then you move into what Enneagram number?
It's not quite. It's not quite that way.
Okay, so you went through 3 of the 9.
We covered 3. So we covered the gut or the body triad, 8, 9, 1, the challenger, the peacemaker, the reformer. So then we have the heart triad, right? People who sort of make their way in the world first with their heart, with their emotions, with their feeling. And that would be types 2, 3, and 4. The 2 is the helper. And my mother is a 2. Our admin support, our amazing assistant Darcy is a 2, and it's just this desire to be helpful, which ultimately is born from a desire to be loved, to feel valuable, accepted, and so they find that oftentimes through being helpful to other people. There's a kind of underlying fear of will I be valued for me? Will I be loved? And so it leads to that, okay, what can I do in order to experience that feeling of love? So strong help kind of orientation. 3s are the achiever. So 3s want to feel valuable and want to feel acceptable, but they often get that less on helping other people than on achieving, on winning. So our executive pastor, Brian, is a 3, and it's oftentimes kind of looking at the events of every day and from a kind of standpoint of winning and losing, succeeding or failing. So very driven, can have a tendency towards workaholism, because oftentimes that sense of self is connected to what I'm achieving, a fear of failure. And so 3s are both feeling dominant but feeling repressed. They can feel their way through a room. What does this room need me to be? Who do they need me to be? But oftentimes have a hard time actually connecting with their own emotions, their own feelings. So the helper, the achiever, and then the number 4 is the individualist. And 4s are the people who they feel all the feels. My wife is a 4. One of my kids is a 4. And they feel all the feels and can feel them all in a very compressed period of time. And so there is this deep desire to be seen, to be known, to be understood. Sometimes it's described as to be unique. And I'm not sure it's the desire to be unique. Oftentimes 4s really are unique.
Yeah.
But there's this real core desire of I want people to understand. I want to feel heard. I want to feel seen. And so there's a fear of being misunderstood, a fear of being dismissed, a fear of being stereotyped, or a fear of being abandoned because you're too much. So that's the heart feeling, the feeling triad is 2s, 3s, and 4s.
Yeah, and I think for those 3 types, it's a lot around what will people think of me. And expresses itself in different ways for the 3 of them, but it's a lot about looking outwardly and how are other people perceiving me? What are they thinking about me? And it's just interesting how it's expressed differently in those 3 very different types, but that's how they're related. Yeah.
But before we hit the other one, Sissy, why can people not assign you a number? I feel like that's one of the first things I heard.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a rule. You can't tell me what number I am.
Yeah, well, because it's about my inner motivation. Now, a lot of times I will think I do know what that person is because I'm hearing a little bit about what motivates them. But truly, you know your motivation, right? You know your heart's desire and motivations. And so that's where it's more, I can tell you, yeah, I'm an 8. Here's why.
Yeah.
But if you know enough about it and the person, you might be able to share with them.
Yeah, when I was first sort of coming to understand the tool, I sort of assigned or sort of guessed
diagnosed.
My wife as a 7, who
Right.
7s we'll talk about are kind of big personality, life of the party, fun, and Kim is all those
Which
things.
she is, yeah.
But that's very external.
Uh-huh.
But that doesn't the inner world of the 7 is very different from Kim's inner world. So she would read that and go, that's not me. And so what happens sometimes is you're reading external, how people present,
Right.
but actually don't have that access to what's going on in their own inner world and that deep sense of motivation. And so we can actually wind up getting in a lot of trouble when we make assumptions about another person if we don't actually understand their inner world. So part of the tool is like you coming to understand yourself. And there's often that sense of resonance. Oh yeah, this is me. And as you mentioned earlier, often also that sense of like, yeah, this is me. I'm not sure I like the fact that this is me.
Yeah.
I kind of wish I was something different, but this really is me. Yeah.
What's the? Can you tell us about the best triad?
The best triad. Well, I can only make the observation that Enneagram 9s, the peacemaker, are the only ones who get their own beatitude from Jesus. So blessed are the peacemakers, right? For they will be called sons of God, right? Blessed are the number 9s. But no, let's talk about the third triad, which is the mind, the head triad. These are people who make their way in the world primarily by relying on thinking. And that's not just thinking in the sense of like smarts, but it really is like strategizing their way through the world, right? And so the 5 is what's called the investigator, or sometimes called the observer. One of my kids is an Enneagram 5, and so very much the most cerebral type of the 9 different personalities, very oriented to wanting to acquire what do I need to know to be okay? What do I need to know to be able to operate self-sufficiently and successfully in the world? And so oftentimes 5 gets very interested in knowing everything there is to know about whatever that thing is that they're particularly interested in or feel like they need to have. And so they have a very high level of insight into oftentimes a number of different things because they really dive deep into what do I need to know.
Yeah.
There's a fear underneath that of not knowing what I need to know to be competent, to be self-sufficient in the world, or a fear of looking foolish. Right? So that's the 5, the investigator or the observer. The 6 is the loyalist, and the 6, they are very warm, caring, devoted kind of people. But for the 6, there's this basic desire to feel security and relationally to feel supported. And so the real struggle, the real challenge for 6s is fear. They fear the worst thing that could possibly happen. I once heard one Enneagram teacher talk about it, 6 experiencing a pre-traumatic stress disorder, right? There's this worst case scenario thinking.
Yeah.
And so they're always trying to sort of think strategically about what happens if things go badly. And there's this basic desire underneath that to feel a sense of security. So they're thinking dominant, but then thinking repressed. That thinking can be unproductive, counterproductive kind of thinking. And then the 7 is the enthusiast. And the 7 is that person who is often the life of the party, a big, fun personality. Like oftentimes they're the people who don't go to the party. They bring the party to the party. You know what I mean? Like they're just fun. There's this desire to drink in all that life has to offer, to experience all that life has to offer, really born from a desire to avoid pain and suffering. And so 7s can really struggle really sitting in or going through, walking through experiences of pain and suffering, whether in their circumstances or in their relationships, and so have a tendency to try to sort of avoid or walk away. So a 7 who's really done some of that good soul work is one who's learning more and more what it means to be present to themselves, to God, and to other people in experiences of hardship, of pain.
Yeah, and I think you even heard it in how you described those 3 types, is that underlying feeling of fear. How do I avoid this fear of not knowing, of what's going to happen, or I'm just trying to avoid this thing. And what they're really looking for is security in 3 of those types. So it's just interesting how you could take these 3 types and group them into these triads, and they have this commonality.
We've talked a lot about the pros of the Enneagram.
Sure.
Can I tell you a concern I have?
Sure.
That's something that I've always carried with me with the Enneagram. I wouldn't say like a problem with it or issue with it, but it feels like sometimes that I feel like it can be a scapegoat of it doesn't allow change for people of, well, this is just, I'm a 5.
That's who I am.
Yeah.
That's who I am.
Yeah.
And there's no changing. There's no getting better at something. That's just, I'm going to be, that's my fault. And then this is my strength. And it kind of puts you in a box.
Yeah.
Am I wrong for having that like skepticism of it?
No, I think that's certainly something to be aware of. So I think just like any other tool, it's a tool for self-awareness, but you got to do something with that. It has to lead to action. So me understanding I'm really afraid of trusting people, and so I don't want to be vulnerable. Well, I can't just sit there in that. It's my awareness of that, and so that's going to lead me to look for power and control and domineer. I've got to do something with that. And so what I had to do was really get to do a lot, and this took me a long time. It wasn't just, well, I read this book and I figured it out. This took me a long time, and it's still a process of understanding here's where I go to in stress. I look for ways to dominate, to get power, and to control people and situations in some really harmful ways. And so rather than saying, I'm just aggressive, just that's who I am, I have to be able to say, well, what is the Lord inviting me into? How do I live into becoming the person that God wants me to be? And then practicing that. So for me, it means trusting people, being vulnerable, knowing that when I'm afraid, when I'm stressed, here's what I go to. When I'm insecure, now how do I become aware of that, bring that to the Lord, and then invite the Lord to do that work and out of that. Just awareness alone is not going to be enough.
Exactly. And I think that the concern you're raising is something that oftentimes do sort of see in the way that the tool plays out. But I think that is a really a sort of superficial understanding of the tool. This is just the way that it is. This is just the way that I am, rather than actually seeing the tool as really the underlying purpose is, like as you said, self-awareness for the sake of transformation. I understand better now my tendency as a 9 towards sloth, towards words I hate to even say out loud, but are true of me in my false self, right? In my old self, my untransformed self, which is the words timidity and passivity. I don't like saying those words at all, and yet I recognize that in my default mode as a 9, that's where I go, towards timidity and passivity. But the whole point of the spiritual life is to be formed in the way of Jesus. And Jesus is neither timid nor passive. And so for me, understanding this is my default mode, understanding this is kind of why it's my default mode, helps me better to say, but I'm going to actually draw on courage. I'm going to draw on strength. I'm going to draw on assertiveness, on doing. And so in some sense, I mean, if you just think about the 8s and 9s, right, that an 8's tendency, default tendency is to sort of to get big, and the 9's sort of default tendency is to get small. And what the tool helps us to do is recognize those tendencies so that we can remain fully human size.
Yeah.
Right? I don't have to get big. I don't have to get small. I can remain fully human.
And the thing about it is when I am acting out of my false self, when I'm living unhealthy, it's because my identity is not rooted in being the beloved daughter of God. So like that's where I have to start from. And if I could start from there, then I could live out into becoming the person that God wants me to be, in being formed to be more like Jesus. And so that awareness is really helpful to me too. Like I have to start every morning by receiving the love of the Father, because that's where I can now live into this is the healthiest person I can be. This is when I'm whole and living really in freedom. And that's, I think, the beauty of what the Enneagram offers. I think can I offer another con while I say that, is not only can it often lead to just, well, this is just who I am, and this settling for awareness without leading to transformation. The other part is we can weaponize it. So I can say, Barry's a 9. He's just going to be passive. He's not going to do anything about this. That's the worst thing we could do to somebody. Because I know Barry enough to know that he's done a lot of work to be aware of where do I go in times of stress and fear, and then what is he doing about it? And the other part of that is he could be a 9 and you could be a 9. It could be very different, and we haven't even talked about wings or anything. And so I think we have to be careful not to stereotype, not to judge. I've had people do that to me in terms of being an 8.
I can't talk to Sissy. She's
That's
just
right.
bulldoze
She's gonna
me over.
she's gonna be aggressive.
Right. We don't give other people, when we use it that way, when we weaponize it, we don't give them the opportunity to show up as their best and truest
that's
self.
good.
Right? Because that tendency toward timidity and passivity is me operating the false self.
Right.
Which is sort of the way that I had to make life okay.
Yeah.
As a kid, that's the way you learn to navigate the world. It was perhaps helpful in some sense. And yet, I don't want, 10-year-old me running my 50-year-old life. I actually have to learn to show up as my best and truest self. And when we make assumptions about, well, Sissy's going to operate this way or Barry's going to operate that way, we don't actually give that person really the chance to show up as their best and truest self. And that's part of what I love about the tool is I've been able to see the way in which Sissy has become more and more her best and truest self. And I hope the same is true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Vice versa. The tool isn't determinative of your behavior. It's descriptive of your default tendency, but the point is transformation.
Well, thanks for this conversation. I mean, the Enneagram is a tool that's so predominant in the church world right now, even outside the church world, that I think it's important for us to have this conversation. And if somebody's listening to this or you're watching this on YouTube and you have somebody in your life, or maybe, well, if it's you, you've already listened, but if you have somebody in your life that has questions about the Enneagram or want to know more about it, here you go. Here's an episode that you can send them and say, give it a chance. Here, if you want to learn more about it, listen to these 3 people talk about the Enneagram. Okay. At the end of each episode, we have a little fun. We have a little banter. This week, it was a question for you guys that whenever I have friends from out of state, you guys have friends from out of state visit. If they've never been to the DFW area, a lot of times we get this question of, all right, well, I got like 48 hours. What should I do? Or I have like one day. I have like a layover in Dallas. What's something I should do? So homework for you guys was what are 3 things that you would tell people if they're visiting DFW that you would want them to do? It could be something they could see, they could be something they could do, or like a place to eat at.
Yeah, so I thought of mine pretty immediately.
Yeah. I grew up here, so you probably, as somebody who came to this area, may actually know better than me.
But I feel like you guys aren't going to be surprised at mine.
I'm so excited.
Perhaps
for
shocked
this.
might be a better word. Well, let me start with what you're not going to be surprised with. I think you'd agree with me on this. So as far as eating, my immediate thought is barbecue. Come to Texas, got to have
Well,
barbecue.
you're a pretty picky eater.
That was my first thought.
I have high standards. I'm not going to lie. That's okay.
You're more picky than I am, right?
No, you are picky in a whole other
In
way.
a whole different way.
Yeah. Barbecue and pecan lodge. That's where I'd go.
That's what I have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, see.
And you even said pecan right.
well,
It's
I
not
have to
pecan.
practice that because it's pecan.
Oh my gosh.
Uh-oh. I like that
Okay, but here's the
adaptability.
one that's going to shock you because this is both see, do, and actually it's all 3: see, do, and eat.
Oh.
You have to come in September and October, and you have to go to the Texas State Fair.
Oh.
That is so. I love the State Fair, which I
Wow.
think would probably shock you. It's a very non-Jersey thing to do, but I love it. Like best people watching other than New York City is at the Texas
Texas
State
State
Fair. Yeah,
Fair.
Texas State Fair. Every kind of fried food that you want, things that you never thought could be fried or fried.
I didn't know you could fry liquid,
Yeah,
but they do.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of things you learn. And so I think, there's rides and all of that. Like, it's great. You spend
Is
the
it-
day at the
I
State
have
Fair.
3 kids,
You've-
and we go broke when we go
Yeah,
to the
well,
fair.
it is.
So,
It could be
so,
expensive.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Is
we
it
sort
hot
of-
take-ish to say it's overrated, the fair?
No, I don't think it's overrated. I think the fair is great.
Okay.
I'm going to stand by that. I know you disagree.
Barry's with me on this.
whisper in the microphone.
Well,
I
you
love
know,
the fair.
I like to do things that don't require me to, eat crackers for like 2 weeks because I spent
Yeah, you
all
can
my
go a
money
little.
on, the state fair. But okay, so Pecan Lodge, State Fair.
That covers covers all 3 for me.
Okay.
Ah,
All three
nice.
had
Yeah.
something to do with food.
Food was Pecan Lodge, seats, people watching at the state fair. You get food there
People
too.
watching's
You
a-
can play all the games. There's even a car show.
So I would just throw in, we do have some great museums in the Metroplex, some of which I've been to multiple times. There's actually a few that are world class that I've not been to, but I actually was supposed to go this last weekend to the Perot Museum
Oh, yeah.
with my daughter.
That's great.
I haven't been yet. The rest of the family has, but we're going to go sometime in the next few weeks over there. I grew up spending a ton of time at the Fort Worth Museum of Science and History. It's a great museum, and my mom worked there when I was a kid, so I went over there a lot. So if you're in Fort Worth, that museum is great. The Kimball Art Museum is a world-class art museum. Dallas Museum of Art is fantastic. We've got the Bush Library, but one that I particularly enjoyed, and it took me a long time to get there, but when I went, I enjoyed it, and that is the Sixth Floor Museum.
Yeah,
the
JFK Museum. Yeah,
museum
it's great.
commemorating JFK and the assassination. My boys give me a hard time for my interest in all the JFK conspiracy theories. I mean, I've read the best books from both the single, lone gunman and the conspiracy theory people, and so anyway, we can maybe banter
both
about
books.
that on a different podcast.
could be a
But the museum is great, so we don't want to get bogged down on that one.
Summer podcast.
That's a whole other episode.
Who killed JFK? Right here.
Barry's theories on
There we
JFK.
go. There we go.
Okay. Is it bad that I have the stockyards on there on my list of?
I've never been, so I can't comment on that.
I think it's worth having on the list, but I think you will find some people who were like, "This is what they have to
Yeah.
offer."
I had this view of what Texas was before I came here, and then I got here. I mean, it's obviously
Yeah.
I moved to downtown Dallas,
Yeah.
and it didn't feel like Texas until I went to the stockyards.
stockyards.
It's like this
Feels
one
like
street
Texas.
where
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, I feel like
A
I could
tiny
be in a
little
Western
glimpse
right
of-
now. Yeah, and the bulls going down the street
Yep.
with the big longhorns and all that stuff. But
One street to live up to all the stereotypes. There you go.
I had Pecan Lodge also.
Good.
And then a Mavericks game. No, I didn't have the Mavericks game on there, but it's more of a Cowboys city. But Cowboys, talking about expensive, Cowboys game.
Yeah.
You go to the Cowboys game, you're paying hundreds of dollars to look at it.
Well, then you're eating crackers for a few weeks.
yeah, $75 for
Yeah.
parking and all that. But guys, thank you so much for listening to this week of Formed. We'll be back next week. And yeah, have a great week.